There are moments in life when a single whisper can change everything. Picture a powerful CEO, a man whose life is defined by glass towers, flawless suits, and boardroom victories. On a snowy night, he walks alone, carrying grief like a weight no one sees. And then through the silence, he hears a fragile voice. "Mommy, please don't die." In that instant, the walls he built around his heart begin to crack. What follows is not a business deal, not a headline, but a story of raw humanity, unexpected love, and the courage to show up when it matters most. This is not just about saving a life, it is about discovering family in the most unlikely place. If you believe in the healing power of compassion, join us, stay with us, and subscribe to Loss and Healing because stories like this are only the beginning. The park was nearly deserted that night, the kind of quiet that only snow can create, when every sound is softened and every shadow seems to breathe. A line of amber lamplight fell in broken halos across the winding path, painting the darkness with fragile circles of warmth. Daniel Whitmore walked there alone, his polished shoes sinking into the thin crust of ice, his gloved hands shoved deep into the pockets of his heavy coat. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a man of purpose, striding forward without hesitation. But inside, he was carrying the weight of a ritual no one else knew. For 7 years, he had returned here on this night to honor the anniversary of the woman he had loved and lost. No board member knew, no assistant scheduled the time. This was the one place where his grief was permitted to breathe. The city around him was a wall of light and noise, but here the world moved slower. The storm drifting in from the north had a strange beauty to it, each snowflake floating as if it had forgotten to fall. He thought of how fitting that was, still, relentless, and cold, the exact mirror of his life since the day death took from him what no wealth could ever replace. People admired him for his empire. They called him invincible, visionary, untouchable, and yet he lived inside a winter that would not end, his heart buried under ice. Halfway down the path, the hush fractured. At first, he thought it was just the wind catching in the bare branches. Then the words came again, faint but clear enough to shatter him. "Mommy, please do not die." He stopped so suddenly that his breath seemed louder than the snow beneath him. He turned toward the voice, drawn to the flickering glow of a failing street lamp, and what he saw changed everything. A young woman lay collapsed in the snow, her skin pale and lips tinged blue. Beside her, a little girl no more than 5 knelt barefoot in the drift, a ragged red coat slipping from her shoulders, her small frame shaking not with sobs, but with cold. For one moment, Daniel froze. He had been asked for so much in his life: money, favors, opportunities, but never this. Never a plea stripped bare of calculation, delivered by a child who had already learned how cruel the world could be. His instinct was not businesslike efficiency. It was something raw, something human. The absurd weight of his tailored coat pressed down on him, a reminder that his wealth had built towers that kissed the clouds, yet had never once been used to pull a soul out of the snow. Without thinking further, he moved. The crunch of his footsteps startled the girl. She looked up at him with wide eyes, streaked with tears and dirt, but steady with the kind of courage children should never have to know. "You are rich, right?" she asked, her voice thin but certain. "Please help my mom." The words cut deeper than any accusation, sharper than any deal gone wrong. He knelt, lowering himself until his gaze met hers. The cold burned his lungs, but her fragility burned more. With a single movement, he slipped off his heavy overcoat and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it close, as if to promise the warmth would not leave again. She did not resist. She only studied him, weighing the risk of trust, already too wise for her age. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Mia," she whispered. "Mia Harper! That is my mommy!" Her small hand pointed toward the still body in the snow. Daniel glanced at the woman Lydia. He would later learn and saw how near the line was, how close death had already crept. A surge of urgency broke through the ice in him. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he called emergency services. His voice clipped but steady, giving the location. He was a man used to crises, but this was not numbers on a screen or contracts to sign. This was breath and blood and a child who should not have been kneeling in the snow. The wind shifted, scattering snowflakes across their faces. He edged closer to shield Mia from the gust, and she leaned into him just slightly, as though testing whether this stranger would truly stay. Sirens began to rise in the distance, their wail folding into the night like an answer. Daniel felt her small fists tighten inside the folds of his coat, and in that pressure, he sensed something he had not felt in years. A crack in the frozen wall he had built around his heart. He stayed there until the flashing lights arrived, until strangers with uniforms and equipment took over, but he never let Mia believe she was alone. When the paramedics lifted Lydia onto the stretcher, Daniel scooped Mia into his arms before her bare feet could touch the icy ground again. He followed them, step for step, unwilling to let the child disappear into the faceless machinery of emergency. The ambulance swallowed them into its harsh light and sterile air, but even there, surrounded by the metallic smell of antiseptic and the sharp efficiency of trained hands, he did not release her. He had crossed a line that night without even realizing it. And though he could not name it yet, he understood one thing. His life had just shifted course, and he would never walk that path the same way again. The ambulance roared through the snowy streets, its siren piercing the night like a blade. But inside the narrow space, the world seemed strangely suspended. Daniel sat rigid against the cold steel wall, the perfect crease of his suit now wrinkled, his expensive tie pulled slightly loose, as if even his clothes understood they no longer belonged to this moment. Across from him, paramedics moved quickly, their hands sure and practiced over Lydia's still body. One adjusted an oxygen mask, another started an IV, and their short-clipped words were foreign to him, a code he could not decipher but instinctively knew meant urgency. The fluorescent lights above flickered against metal and plastic, a far cry from the polished glass and wood that framed his usual life. Here, control did not belong to him. He glanced at his reflection in the small glass panel on the door. It mocked Hyman image of precision and wealth, shoes that shone even in the dim light. A man built for boardrooms, not for this suffocating rush of antiseptic air. Yet beside him sat a child who did not care about his resume, his fortune, or his name. Mia huddled in his overcoat, dwarfed by its size, her small body swallowed whole by the fabric. She was silent, her wide eyes fixed only on her mother, who lay pale and motionless on the stretcher. Every so often, Mia would lean forward and rest her tiny hand on Lydia's, her lips pressed tight, as if sheer determination might keep her mother tethered to this world. She was too calm, too composed for a child, and that stillness shook Daniel more than any panic could have. The vehicle lurched over an icy patch, jolting them all. A soft sound broke from Mia's throat, a whimper so faint, it was almost lost beneath the siren. Without thinking, Daniel leaned closer. "She is going to be okay," he said, though his voice betrayed the uncertainty he refused to show. He was not sure if the words were for her or for himself. Mia only nodded, not looking away from Lydia, her little hand still clinging to something that felt bigger than hope. He realized then that this girl carried more courage in her silence than many men carried in an entire lifetime. When the ambulance doors opened at the hospital bay, the blast of cold air felt like a slap. Lydia was rolled out first, paramedics shouting instructions to a waiting team. Mia scrambled to follow, her bare feet already moving, but Daniel was faster. He scooped her up into his arms and carried her inside, ignoring the stares of strangers as they rushed through the antiseptic corridors. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, sterile walls, and hurried footsteps. Voices blended into a constant hum of codes and instructions. Daniel had always hated hospitals, their brightness that somehow still felt cold, their efficiency that never disguised how fragile life was. Tonight, that dislike deepened into something raw. He felt like a foreign body inside these walls, a man who did not belong. But leaving was unthinkable. At the admitting desk, a nurse with weary eyes studied Lydia's chart. Hypothermic, severely malnourished, dehydrated, she recited. Her tone was brisk, professional, almost detached. Then came the question that seemed to strip the last illusion from the night. Does she have insurance? Daniel hesitated, caught off guard, but Mia answered for him with a voice steady and certain. "No, we don't have a house either." The words landed heavier than the snow outside. The nurse's expression barely shifted, but Daniel felt something twist inside him. He realized he could not explain where they had been living, could not even give an address. Before he could think of the consequences, before his logical mind could build walls of excuses, he took the clipboard and filled in his own details. "Put all the charges under me." The nurse blinked, surprised. "Sir, just do it." His voice carried the same tone he used to close deals, but this was no negotiation. It was a decision, final and absolute. For a moment, disbelief rippled through him. He was a man who did not cross certain lines, who lived by the separation of his world from others' struggles. Yet as he handed back the forms, he knew there was no regret, not even the faintest hesitation. He looked at Mia, still wrapped in his coat, her eyes locked on him with a gravity that felt too heavy for someone so small. In that gaze, he saw something he had not expected.
Yes.
Trust. Not the negotiated trust of contracts or the conditional trust of investors, but a trust born out of desperation and hope. And somehow, he wanted to be worthy of it. They waited together as Lydia was wheeled down a long hallway, machines beeping faintly in rhythm with her fragile heartbeat. Daniel followed a step behind, Mia's small hand gripping his fingers as though she feared letting go would make him vanish. Even when the nurses closed the door of the examination room, Mia remained at his side, her grip tightening. Daniel sat stiffly in the waiting area, the hard plastic chair beneath him unfamiliar and unfitting. But for once, he did not mind. He had no meeting on his mind, no deadlines, no deals. There was only the child at his side and the unconscious woman beyond the door. Minutes stretched into hours, measured by the rhythmic shuffle of nurses' shoes and the low hum of hospital machines. Mia curled into his coat, her eyelids heavy but her grip still firm. He watched her and thought, almost unwillingly, that walking away was no longer an option. He had crossed an invisible threshold, and though he did not yet know where it would lead, he felt certain of one truth. He could not abandon her. Not now, not ever. And as the night deepened, Daniel Whitmore, the man who had once measured his worth in skyscrapers and contracts, began to measure it in the fragile weight of a child's hand resting trustingly in his own. The morning light filtering through the hospital windows was pale, stretched thin across the sterile white walls. Daniel had told himself he would only stop by for a short while, just long enough to confirm that Mia was safe before heading back to the Empire waiting for him downtown. That was the plan, simple and logical. Yet when he stepped into the pediatric waiting area, he saw her sitting cross-legged in a chair that seemed far too big for her. Crayons spread across her lap, carefully filling in the lines of a coloring book. His plan began to unravel before it even had a chance to exist. She was deliberate, precise, coloring with care as if it mattered to get every shade just right. There was no wild scribbling, no careless abandon of a carefree child. Instead, there was intention in each stroke, the kind of focus born from a life that had taught her early that some things slip away if you are not careful. Daniel felt an unexpected heaviness in his chest. This little girl had already carried more responsibility than she should have known. He stood there watching her, the leather of his shoes clicking faintly against the floor, when a nurse approached him with a woman in a navy blazer. She introduced herself as Carla Bennett from Child Protective Services. Her tone was calm, professional, polite, in a way that carried boundaries. Daniel recognized it instantly. It was the voice of someone trained to manage crises without being pulled in emotionally. Carla explained that Lydia was still undergoing tests, and that, given the circumstances, Mia might need to be placed in temporary foster care. The words were careful, measured, but they landed like ice in Daniel's stomach. Foster care meant removal. It meant this child who had clung to him in the snow might soon be handed to strangers. Mia must have sensed something because her crayon paused mid-stroke. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting Daniel's with a directness that stunned him. Without a word, she slid off her chair, walked to his side, and gripped the cuff of his sleeve. She stood silently, her gaze steady, and then spoke with a clarity that belied her age. "If you leave," she said softly, "we will not have anyone ever again." The words struck deeper than any accusation. They were not dramatic, not pleading.
Good morning.
They were
I'm
a
here for the
statement of
official
fact,
visit.
as if she already knew what abandonment
Distant
felt
relative
like
is
and
seeking
could not
custody,
bear it
and
again.
this presents the
Carla
new
blinked,
legal
clearly
complication.
taken aback by the force of that connection. She turned to Daniel, her voice still even, but carrying a hint of caution. "Whitmore, I understand you may feel concerned, but foster placement is often the safest option." Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not need to.
I see an
Years of
inconsistency.
commanding boardrooms had given him a tone that could freeze arguments before they began. "They are not going anywhere without me," he said quietly but firmly. It was not negotiation. It was a declaration. Carla studied him for a long moment, measuring whether this was a man acting on impulse or conviction. Finally,
promise
she admitted the
no one
only
will
legal
ever
way
separate
forward
us.
was for him to petition for temporary guardianship until Lydia recovered. The words hung heavy in the air, surrounded by the sterile hum of the hospital. Guardianship, responsibility, scrutiny. Daniel looked down at Mia, her small hand still gripping
We
his
shall
sleeve
fight
like it was the
together
only
as
anchor
one.
she had. His world waited outside contracts, investors, an office where no one else could sign the documents
Hello,
piled on
is
his
this the
desk.
skilled attorney?
None of it seemed urgent now. "I am sure," he said. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. They moved to a small conference room where Carla outlined the process. Background checks, emergency custody agreements, the possibility of court hearings if the arrangement extended beyond a few weeks. The words sounded like obstacles, but Daniel heard them as commitments.
Here is a
He
small
did
note
not
for you.
hesitate when the paperwork was set
thank
before
you.
him. Each stroke of his pen was deliberate, his signature written with the same precision he used to close billion-dollar deals. But unlike those deals, this one felt different. It was not about profit or prestige. It was about promising a child that she would not be left alone in a hospital waiting room. When the last page was signed, Carla gathered the documents and confirmed that he would now be responsible for Mia's care until further notice. Food, shelter, medical needs, all of it. Daniel nodded without flinching. For years, he had carried a reputation as a man who never stepped into what was not his problem. Yet as he glanced at Mia, who still had not let go of his sleeve, he realized he had never been so certain of anything. She was not just a child he had rescued in the snow. She was someone who had pulled him, without knowing, out of his own endless winter. Back in the waiting area, Mia returned to her chair, picked up her coloring book, and continued her picture as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred.
Just nice,
But Daniel
even
knew better.
breaths, in
Something had
and out.
shifted. The line between his life and hers was no longer faint. It had been crossed, not in pencil, but in ink. When she finally closed her coloring book and asked, "Can we
Almost
see
there,
my mom
sweetie."
now?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his face for truth. "Not yet," he said gently, "but we will soon." She slipped her hand into his once more, and this time there was no hesitation. For the first time in years, Daniel felt warmth spread through the cold that had lived in him. He did not have the words for it yet, but he knew. Walking away would never be an option again. The corporate apartment Daniel chose for them was immaculate, a showcase of modern architecture and wealth. It sat high above the city, walls of glass stretching skyward, the kind of place designed to impress clients, not to comfort a child. When he opened the door for Mia, the scent of fresh paint and untouched furniture polish greeted them. The space gleamed, spotless and silent, too perfect, too lifeless. To Daniel, it had
We have
always
established a
seemed
pattern of
acceptable,
behavior that
even
shows a
enviable.
blatant disregard
But
for due
now,
process.
walking in with a little girl whose entire world fit into a worn backpack, it felt more like a hotel than a home. Mia paused in the doorway, her small fingers curled tightly
May
around
it
the strap
please
of
the
her
court.
bag. Her eyes roamed over the glossy dining table, the sleek appliances, the enormous windows that looked down upon the city lights. "It's big," she whispered, almost unsure if she was allowed to step forward. "You can explore," Daniel told her softly, setting down the groceries he had picked up on the way.
The child placed
"It's yours
such
for now."
quiet trust in
She
both of
blinked,
them.
testing the words as though they might vanish if
It
she
was my
believed them too
devotion to my
quickly.
family,
"For
and
both
our
of us?"
shared will to
she asked, her
survive,
voice
will
barely
carry us
audible.
through.
He nodded. "For you and your mom when she
I will
comes
not
home."
waver in my
Her
conviction.
shoulders relaxed just a little, and she slipped off her shoes, stepping
I will
onto the
never
polished
forget that
floor
night
like
in
she
the
was
snow
testing whether it
and the
would hold her
continued
weight.
care we provided.
That afternoon, Daniel worked to transform the
In our
apartment into
professional
something
opinion, the
warmer.
current care
He
arrangement
stocked
is
the
in best
refrigerator
interest
with
of all parties
groceries,
involved.
laid blankets on the bed, turned the heat up higher than usual. Small acts, almost insignificant, but in their accumulation, they began to reshape the air. Mia contributed in her own way. She taped one of her drawings, a crooked sun, above a stick figure, house onto the refrigerator door. That piece of paper shifted the room more than all his expensive decor ever had. By evening, the dining table that once looked like a showroom prop was cluttered with takeout containers and 2 plates bearing pasta remnants. It was not elegant, but it was their first meal together, and it changed everything. Later, they returned to the hospital. Lydia was pale, her breathing shallow, but her
Family
eyes
members
fluttered
showing up.
open when she saw them. Mia clambered up beside her, small fingers clutching her mother's hand. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, uncertain of his place until Lydia's gaze found his. Her lips moved, her voice weak but clear enough to reach him. "Why are you doing this?" It was the kind of question Daniel could usually answer instantly. He had built an empire convincing people of his motives, wrapping intention in persuasive words. But here, honesty was the only currency. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. Because someone has to. Lydia's brows furrowed, as though she could not quite believe the simplicity. Gratitude flickered in her tired eyes. She did not say thank you, but she did not need to. The look carried more weight than words. That night, back in the apartment, Mia fell asleep quickly, curled up on the couch under a blanket, the television humming faintly in the background. Daniel lingered nearby, watching the slow rhythm of her breathing. The apartment no longer felt sterile. It carried a hum, faint but undeniable, of life beginning to fill its corners. For years, Daniel had walked into rooms that reflected success, but never warmth. Tonight, he realized that even a small hand-drawn sun could outshine the glow of city skylines. The following morning, the new routine continued. Daniel brewed coffee in the pristine kitchen, while Mia sat at the dining table with her coloring book. Sunlight filtered weakly through the glass, washing the room in silver. For the first time in years, he felt the faint stirrings of rhythm, the kind that belonged not to meetings and schedules, but to ordinary mornings shared with someone else. He almost let himself believe it could last, but the phone call from the hospital broke that fragile illusion. Lydia's condition had changed overnight. They had stabilized her, the nurse explained, but further tests were urgent. Daniel was already pulling on his coat before the call ended. His voice came out sharper than he intended when he told Mia, "We are going." She looked up at him with wide eyes, then quickly nodded and grabbed her backpack. The hospital was tense when they arrived, the air thick with clipped conversations and hurried footsteps. Nurses adjusted monitors around Lydia's bed, their movements brisk and precise. Daniel felt the same knot in his chest that had first gripped him in the park. For a man who could bend industries to his will, he was utterly powerless here. His money and influence could not force Lydia's body to heal. He crouched beside Mia, who stood staring through the glass at her mother. "She is in the best place for her right now," he said carefully.
Seems to be in order
"And
here.
I am not going anywhere."
Yes, it does.
She slipped her hand into his, her expression calm but her grip fierce. Together they stood there, silent but united, the hum of machines filling the corridor around them. In the days that followed, Daniel's life shifted even further. His mornings began not with phone calls and spreadsheets, but with walking Mia down hospital hallways, stopping at vending machines for hot cocoa before visiting Lydia's room. He sat with his coffee in the corner while Mia perched on the bed, chattering to her mother even when Lydia was too exhausted to respond. Doctors noted Lydia's slow improvement, her cheeks gaining faint color, her eyes more alert, but their words carried caution. Daniel filled in the spaces between medical updates. He made sure Lydia ate. He asked questions when the jargon grew too thick. He scheduled follow-ups. He was not just present, he was becoming part of their world. One afternoon, Mia shyly asked if they could build a castle from the cardboard boxes still stacked in the apartment. He had a high-profile lunch on his calendar that day, one his assistant had been reminding him about for weeks. He glanced at his phone, then at Mia's hopeful eyes. The decision came without hesitation. Let's do it. Hours later, they sat on the floor surrounded by scissors, tape, and paper flags. The living room transformed into a fortress of imagination, its turrets crooked, its drawbridge prone to collapse. Mia laughed every time the bridge fell open too quickly.
Thank you.
The sound echoed through Daniel's chest in a way no applause at a board meeting ever had. When they finished, Mia insisted on taking a photo to show her mother. That night, when they returned to the hospital and handed Lydia the picture, her first real smile bloomed. Daniel felt himself smiling too, unguarded and true. Back at the apartment later, Mia pulled a piece of paper from her backpack and worked quietly with her crayons. When she was done, she handed it to Daniel. It was a simple drawing. 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing under a bright yellow sun. Above them, in uneven letters, she had written, "Our family." The lump that rose in Daniel's throat was unexpected, sharp, and impossible to swallow. He stared at the picture for a long time, struck by the innocence of it and the truth it carried. When he looked up, Lydia was awake, watching him with tired but steady eyes. "She is right," she said softly. "You are part of this." Her words, spoken without hesitation, sank deep into him. He had spent years living behind walls of ice, but here, with a child's drawing and a woman's quiet trust, something inside him was thawing. That night, Daniel taped the drawing to the refrigerator beside the photo of the cardboard castle. The apartment no longer felt cold. It felt claimed. It felt alive. And though the world outside still raced with noise and demands, inside these walls, he felt the beginning of something he had not known in years: belonging. The knock came early on a gray morning, sharp and deliberate, echoing through the quiet apartment. Daniel opened the door to find a woman standing there, her coat buttoned tight against the cold, a clipboard balanced in her hands. She introduced herself as Angela Rivera from Child Services. Her tone was polite but guarded, a mask of professionalism that hinted at something heavier beneath. Daniel stepped aside reluctantly, his instincts immediately alert. Behind him, Mia was humming softly at the dining table, her crayons spread out like a small world she controlled with color. He shifted his stance subtly so Angela's line of sight would not fall directly on the child. She wasted little time. A woman had come forward, claiming to be a distant relative of Mia's through her father's side. She wanted custody, citing her ability to provide a more stable environment. The phrase struck Daniel like ice. Stable environment. He repeated the words in his mind, each syllable carrying the weight of judgment, as though the home they were slowly building could be dismissed so easily. "Does this woman even know Mia?" he asked. Angela hesitated, then admitted her record showed inconsistencies, frequent moves, no stable employment, questionable associations. Off the record, Angela confessed concern. On the record, the petition had to be considered. Mia peeked around the corner then, her crayon still in her hand. Her voice was clear and simple. "Who is that?" Daniel's tone softened. "This is Ms. Rivera. She is here to make sure you are okay." Mia answered without hesitation, "I am okay." She returned to her coloring as if that ended the matter. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew it would not end there. When Angela left, the apartment felt colder, the hum of the heater suddenly insufficient. Daniel stood for a long moment by the door, staring at the empty hallway, before returning to Mia. He placed his hand on the back of her chair. "Sometimes people think they can make decisions for others without asking," he told her. "But I promise, I am not letting anyone take you away from your mom." She looked up at him, her gaze steady, and whispered one word. "Promise?" He nodded. "Promise." Later that day, Daniel went to the hospital. Lydia was sitting upright, her face still pale but stronger than before, a worn paperback open in her hands. When he told her about the social worker's visit, the color drained from her face. "They will take her from me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel leaned forward, his tone firm, unyielding. "Then we fight together." Lydia's eyes softened, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. "You do not have to do this," she said weakly. "You have already done more than anyone." He shook his head, his grip tightening over her hand. "I want to. I will not let her go to someone who does not have her best interest at heart. Not now, not ever." Relief flickered in her gaze, faint but real. That evening, Daniel's office phone remained unanswered. Instead, he made calls that mattered. To his attorney, Claire Morrison, a woman known for her sharp mind and steadiness under pressure. To trusted contacts who could uncover the truth about this so-called relative. To hospital staff who had witnessed his commitment and could testify to Lydia's progress. Claire listened carefully, then said, "We will need airtight documentation. Medical records, evidence of your role in Mia's daily care, testimony from those who have seen you with her. We should also prepare for court." Daniel's response was simple. "Then, let's begin now." When he hung up, he found Mia sitting cross-legged on the couch, drawing again. This time, the picture showed 3 figures, holding hands in front of a tall building that looked suspiciously like the apartment tower they lived in. Above the figures, in large, uneven letters, she had written, "Home." He stood there silently, the weight of the day pressing down before sitting beside her. Without asking, he picked up a crayon and added a small sun in the corner. She looked at him in surprise, then smiled. "You are helping?" He nodded. "Always." In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a man with 2 lives. By day, he was still a CEO, but now his calendar was filled with legal meetings and hospital visits rather than investor calls. At night, he was a guardian in every sense of the word, making meals, reviewing medical charts, keeping Mia's routine steady. He gathered receipts, notes, and photos, building the evidence Claire would need. The sterile apartment began to transform further. Drawings lined the refrigerator. A cardboard castle still occupied a corner of the living room. Mia's laughter filled spaces that once echoed with silence. Each change was small, almost imperceptible, but together they built something far stronger than the pristine emptiness that had existed before. The looming court battle was a storm on the horizon, but Daniel was no longer afraid of storms. Not when he had Mia's hand in his. She had once asked a stranger in the snow for help, and that plea had turned his entire life. Now, when she looked up at him, her eyes steady and certain, he knew the truth. He was no longer just helping. He was protecting something worth fighting for, something worth claiming as family. The courthouse rose like a fortress of stone against the gray winter morning, its wide steps slick with ice, the air sharp enough to bite the lungs. Daniel and Lydia climbed slowly, not because of the weather, but because of the weight pressing on their shoulders. Inside, the halls smelled of polished wood and old paper, echoes of footsteps bouncing off walls that had witnessed countless battles of law and loss. They were guided to a courtroom washed in pale light from high windows, where silence pressed down as firmly as judgment. Daniel pulled out a chair for Lydia before sitting beside her. Beneath the table, her hand slid into his, and their fingers laced together. A silent pact carved out of fear and defiance. Across the aisle sat the petitioner, the distant relative, her eyes sharp with calculation. At her side, a lawyer in an ill-fitting suit shuffled papers with a confidence that felt rehearsed. In the gallery, Mia sat with a volunteer, her legs swinging above the floor, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. When her gaze met Daniel's, she did not smile, but she held his eyes with quiet steadiness, as if reminding him of the promise he had made. The judge entered, a woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, her gavel tapping lightly before she spoke. The petitioner's lawyer went first, spinning a narrative of instability. Lydia's collapse in the park, her lack of permanent housing, her medical history. Each word painted her as unfit, each phrase crafted to suggest Mia deserved something more conventional, something safer. Daniel felt Lydia's grip tighten under the table. He leaned slightly toward her, his thumb brushing reassurance across her knuckles. The lawyer's words dripped with condescension, but Daniel had learned long ago that facts, not arrogance, win in the end. When it was their turn, Claire Morrison rose. Her presence was steady, her voice precise. She outlined Lydia's resilience, her devotion to Mia, the strength it took to survive illness and hardship. Into evidence she entered a thick binder. Photos of Mia, warm and cared for, eating balanced meals in the apartment, medical records showing Lydia's steady recovery, statements from doctors and nurses, even testimony from the volunteer who had seen Mia's quiet trust in both her mother and Daniel. Then Claire called Lydia to the stand. Lydia walked forward with her chin lifted, her steps soft but sure. She swore in, sat, and began to speak. Her words were simple, but each one carried the weight of lived truth. She told the court she knew what it meant to live without safety, which was why she fought for it every day for her daughter. She spoke of Mia being her reason to get up, to fight through sickness, to endure. Her voice wavered once, but she steadied it. "She is my reason for everything," she said. The courtroom was silent, the words falling like stones into still water. When Claire called Daniel next, the room seemed to shift. He walked to the stand with the calm precision he carried into every high-stakes meeting, but his voice held none of the polish of business. "The night I met Mia," he began, "she was barefoot in the snow, trying to wake her mother. I did not think about whether it was my place. I just knew I had to act. Since then, I have seen nothing but strength in Lydia. She is not unstable. She is unshakable. And I will stand beside her as long as it takes to make sure Mia grows up knowing she is safe and loved." His words were not rehearsed, not strategic. They were the truth, raw and steady. And for once, he felt no need to convince anyone. Angela Rivera, the social worker, was the final witness. Her testimony was measured but firm. She confirmed her investigation into the petitioner's background revealed troubling inconsistencies. Unstable housing, questionable associations, a lack of evidence that this relative could provide the stability she claimed. "In my professional opinion," she concluded, "Mia is best served by remaining with her mother, under the current care arrangement supported by Mr. Whitmore." Her words carried weight, not just as an opinion, but as a professional verdict. When closing statements ended, the judge sat silent, pen poised over her notes. The room held its breath. Then she set the pen down and spoke. The evidence shows that the respondent has provided a safe, nurturing environment for her child with the support of Mr. Whitmore. The petitioner has not demonstrated that a change in custody would serve the child's best interests. Custody will remain with Lydia Harper. Furthermore, the court recognizes Mr. Whitmore as the child's legal stepfather, effective immediately. The words landed like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Lydia's shoulders sagged with relief, and Daniel felt her hand tremble in his. In the gallery, Mia clapped once, sharp and joyful, before rushing into her mother's arms. Outside, cameras waited. Reporters pressed forward, voices sharp, asking why a CEO would involve himself so deeply. Daniel's reply was calm, almost serene. Because family is not about blood, it is about showing up. He turned from the cameras to Lydia, his voice lower now, private. "What would you think," he murmured, "about making this permanent?" Her eyes widened, surprise giving way to something warmer. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" His faint smile was answer enough. Behind them, Mia hummed softly in the backseat of the car as they drove away, a sound as steady as a heartbeat. Spring returned to the city slowly, coaxing green from corners long buried under snow. One morning, in the park where Daniel once walked alone, folding chairs faced a small arch dressed with ribbons and eucalyptus. Guests gathered, people who had stepped into their story when it mattered. The nurse who had braided Mia's hair during long shifts, the building doorman who always saved extra markers for her, Angela Rivera without her clipboard, Claire Morrison in a floral dress instead of courtroom black. Even Judge Porter sat quietly, a guest instead of an arbiter. Mia came first, a pale blue dress making her look like she carried a piece of sky. She dropped petals with earnest seriousness, scattering them across the very path where she had once begged for her mother's life. Then Lydia walked beneath the budding trees, her smile trembling but radiant, freckles alive again after a long winter. Daniel met her beneath the arch, breath catching in his chest. They spoke their own vows, not borrowed, not ornate, but born of nights in hospitals, of coloring books on waiting room chairs, of a child's drawing that read, "Our family." He promised to keep their door open and their table warm, to be not only Lydia's husband, but the father Mia already believed him to be. Lydia promised not to be fixed, but to build, to listen, to keep their home a place where fear had to knock before entering. When Mia declared, "Ring time," laughter rippled through the crowd. Daniel knelt, and she placed the bands in his hand like treasure. They slid them onto each other's fingers, sealing a promise that had begun in the snow. The applause rose like a tide, not loud but warm, a wave of love that wrapped around them. The reception was simple. A picnic stretched across the afternoon, lemonade sweating in the sun, music drifting from an old speaker, children chasing bubbles across the grass. Daniel tapped his glass once, drawing the circle close. He announced the Haven Fund, a promise to extend their story outward to ensure other families would have shelter, safety. A yes where they once only heard no. His words were not grand, but they were enough. They were the foundation of something larger than themselves. As the sun lowered, painting the park in gold, Daniel, Lydia, and Mia walked together down the path. The lampposts flickered on, not as warnings against the dark, but as reminders that light always returns. Mia slipped her hand into his, her voice quiet but firm. "We found you in the snow. Now you are ours." Daniel pulled her close, reaching for Lydia, their shadows blending into one. A single tear slipped free, warm and unashamed. He looked up into the clear sky, the last trace of winter gone, and whispered silently to himself, "I am never letting go. Life has a way of surprising us in the quietest moments." Sometimes it is not the grand victories or the carefully planned futures that define who we are, but the unexpected intersections where two lives collide. Daniel had spent years walking alone through the cold, convinced that grief had sealed his heart in permanent winter. He believed success could shield him, that skyscrapers and contracts could distract him from the emptiness waiting when the lights went out. Yet all it took was a whisper in the snow, a little girl begging her mother not to diet to shatter that illusion and redirect the course of his life forever. What followed was not a miracle in the dramatic sense, It was something quieter, yet infinitely more powerful. It was a man learning to sit in waiting rooms, to brew morning coffee for a child who colored carefully inside the lines, to exchange boardroom schedules for cardboard castles and hospital visits. It was a child discovering that sometimes promises are not broken, that sometimes a stranger can become family. And it was a woman, weary from illness, finding that trust can be rebuilt through presence, through a steady hand that refuses to let go. Their story is not about wealth rescuing poverty, nor about charity handed down from on high. It is about the courage to show up again and again, even when nothing guarantees the outcome. It is about the slow building of trust, the ordinary moments that accumulate until they form something extraordinary. A drawing taped to a refrigerator, a laugh shared over a collapsing cardboard bridge, a vow whispered beneath blooming trees. These are the bricks of belonging. And belonging is what transforms survival into life. In the end, Daniel, Lydia, and Mia did not just form a family. They built a promise that extends beyond themselves. The Haven Fund became a way to carry their story outward, to ensure that mothers and children who whisper in the night for safety will not be left unheard. Their love grew roots, not just in their home, but in the lives of strangers who may never know their names but will feel the echo of their choices. And this is where you come in. Because stories like this are not meant to end when the video fades. They are seeds, waiting to be planted in every heart willing to listen. If this journey touched you, if you believe that compassion still has the power to transform loneliness into family and despair into hope, then join us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing. By staying with us, you are saying yes to more stories that remind us of the strength found in tenderness, the resilience born from love, and the healing that comes when we choose each other. The world is noisy and relentless, but here together, we create a soft refusal. A place where light shows up on time, where kindness is not forgotten, where every whisper for help has the chance to be answered. Stay with us, walk with us, and let us keep writing stories of hope, of love, and of healing one heart at a time.